An airline supervisor thought he was just another passenger, until the Black Army captain laid his Pentagon-sealed orders on the counter. In an instant, the terminal went silent. No one moved, no one spoke, because they realized he wasn't there for himself. He was there to bring a fallen soldier home. The Call of Duty Captain Marcus Hayes adjusted the crease in his uniform trousers as he walked briskly through the glass doors of Atlanta International Airport. The buzz of conversations, rolling suitcases, and overhead announcements blended into a restless symphony around him. But his focus was unwavering. Today was not just another travel day. Today was a mission. In his left hand, he carried a slim black leather case. Inside were his official orders stamped with the insignia of the Department of Defense. His assignment: to escort the body of Private First Class Jonathan Miller, a 21-year-old soldier who had died in service, back to his hometown in Missouri. For Marcus, such missions were the most solemn of duties. They required precision, respect, and composure. He wasn't just escorting a body. He was carrying the weight of a family's grief, the echo of a nation's promise, and the silent brotherhood of soldiers who knew that one day someone might have to escort them home too. As he approached the check-in counter for the airline, Marcus carried himself with the quiet authority of someone who had spent more than a decade in service. His broad shoulders filled the space, his posture straight, his jaw set. Yet beneath the steely exterior, there was always that familiar tug, the ache of remembering his own friends who had not made it back alive. The counter. The airline counter bustled with activity. Behind the desk, a woman with a badge reading, "Supervisor, L." Whitmore was checking passports with brisk efficiency. Marcus waited patiently until it was his turn. When he stepped forward, placing his military ID and orders on the counter, her eyes flicked over them briefly. "I'm here on escort duty," Marcus said evenly. His voice carried both authority and calm. "There's a military casket that will be boarding this flight. I have clearance to accompany it." The supervisor scanned his ID again, her lips pressing into a thin line. "Sir," she began, her tone clipped, "this is a civilian airline. You'll need to check with cargo services for that sort of thing." Marcus didn't flinch. "Ma'am, with respect, these are my orders. I am the official escort. I must accompany the remains on this flight, seated in the cabin. That's standard protocol." Whitmore's eyes narrowed. She lowered her voice slightly, but not enough to mask the condescension. "I've been working here 15 years. I've never heard of such a thing. You'll have to wait." Passengers in line began to shift uncomfortably, some leaning in to catch snippets of the exchange. Marcus remained calm, though a muscle twitched in his jaw. "Ma'am," he repeated, "this is not optional. It is a matter of duty. I'm simply asking you to review the orders." The weight of silence. Whitmore sighed dramatically and called over another employee. "Can you verify this? He says he needs to escort a casket in the cabin?" The younger employee glanced at Marcus's documents, his eyes widening at the Pentagon seal. "That looks official," he murmured, but Whitmore waved him off. "Official? Or not, we have rules. Everyone thinks they're special." She looked directly at Marcus now, her tone sharp. "You'll have to move aside, sir. We can't hold up the line." A ripple of murmurs ran through the passengers waiting nearby. Marcus inhaled slowly. He had faced hostile terrain, survived ambushes, and commanded soldiers under fire. Yet here, in the middle of an airport terminal, he was being treated like an inconvenience. Or worse, a fraud. For a brief second, anger flared inside him, but he quickly pushed it down. He thought of his grandmother's words when he was young. "Marcus, people will try to strip you of your dignity. Don't ever hand it to them." So he stood tall, refusing to raise his voice. "Supervisor Whitmore," he said, calm but firm, "please call your operations manager. I will wait." Flashback. Lessons in patience. As he stood there, memories flickered across his mind like a film reel. He remembered being 12 years old, standing in line at a grocery store in Alabama, when a cashier had ignored him and rung up everyone else first. His grandmother had placed a gentle hand on his shoulder and whispered, "Patience is power, you'll see." And he had. By waiting silently, they had drawn attention to the injustice, and the manager had eventually stepped in, apologizing profusely. That day, Marcus learned that sometimes silence and composure spoke louder than shouting ever could. Now, decades later, in a busy terminal filled with watchful eyes, Marcus summoned that same patience. Escalation. Minutes stretched like hours. More. Passengers gathered, curious. A couple of veterans in caps edged closer, frowning at the scene. Finally, Whitmore returned with a tall man in a blazer, the operations manager. He looked at Marcus, then at the documents. "Sir, what seems to be the issue?" The manager asked. Marcus handed over his orders again. "Captain Marcus Hayes, U.S. Army, escorting the remains of Private First Class Miller. These are my instructions." The manager's expression changed as he read the papers, but before he could speak, Whitmore interjected. "It doesn't matter what it says. This is against policy. We can't have military escorts just boarding however they please." Her voice was sharp enough that a mother holding a toddler nearby flinched. The murmur of the crowd grew louder. Marcus's heart thudded. He hated scenes like this, hated being forced into them. But his duty was clear. He could not step aside. He was not just Marcus Hayes' passenger. He was Captain Hayes, escort of a fallen soldier. The quiet resolve, the veterans who had been watching finally spoke. One, an elderly man with a Navy cap, raised his voice. "He's telling the truth. That's how it works. You should respect him." Whitmore shot him a look but didn't reply. The manager cleared his throat. "Supervisor, let's not escalate this. Clearly these are official." But Whitmore cut him off again. "I need more verification. Anyone could print a document these days." Marcus locked eyes with her. For a moment, the sounds of the terminal seemed to fade. It was as if the entire airport was waiting to see what he would do next. Slowly, deliberately, he reached into his leather case and withdrew a thick envelope sealed with the Department of Defense insignia. He placed it on the counter. "These," he said evenly, "are my escort orders, signed by the commanding officer, stamped by the Pentagon. If you doubt their authenticity, I suggest you call the number listed at the bottom. They will confirm everything." The envelope sat there like a weight, commanding respect. The murmurs ceased. Even Whitmore hesitated, her eyes darting between Marcus's face and the seal on the document. For the first time, her voice faltered. I'll have to call this in." The crowd was utterly silent now. And in that silence, Marcus stood taller, embodying not just one man but the quiet dignity of every soldier who had ever been questioned, doubted, or disrespected, yet had held their ground with honor. The pause. Before the storm, the envelope with the Pentagon seal rested on the counter like a stone dropped into still water. Its presence rippled across the terminal, changing the air itself. The chatter had ceased. Children were hushed by their parents. Phones lowered from faces. Captain Marcus Hayes didn't shift his weight or break eye contact with the supervisor. His voice was steady, each word precise. "You may call the number on those orders. I'll wait here as long as necessary. But until you do, this mission does not move an inch without me." The operations manager picked up the envelope carefully, as though it were fragile. His eyes scanned the words, his lips moving silently as he read the details. The longer he looked, the graver his expression became. Whitmore folded her arms defensively. "Anybody can forge documents. I'm not just letting him through because he says he's on some mission. What if this is some kind of trick?" A murmur of disapproval ran through the crowd. A young woman near the back whispered loudly, "He's literally in uniform. What kind of trick could it be?" Another voice, older, firmer, "That's a captain's insignia. Show some respect." Flashback. The commission is. Whitmore fumbled with her phone. Marcus's mind flickered back to the day he had first pinned on his captain's bars. It had been at Fort Benning, under the hot Georgia sun. His mother had been in the front row, her hands trembling as she pinned the insignia to his uniform. "Son," she'd whispered, tears streaming down her cheeks, "your grandfather wanted this day for you. He fought in Korea, and he always said you'd go further than he did. He had promised her then, and himself, that every decision he made in uniform would honor that legacy." today, standing in an airport being doubted and delayed, that promise burned in his chest like a steady flame. Verification, Whitmore dialed the number on the orders, her jaw set, her shoulders stiff with stubbornness. Everyone around leaned forward, as though they could catch the conversation through sheer willpower. "Yes," she said into the phone. "This is Supervisor Whitmore from Gate 17, Atlanta International. I have a man here claiming to be a captain in the U.S. Army. Says he's escorting remains." Her eyes flicked to Marcus, skeptical still. "I need to verify if this is real." The line on the other end buzzed, then a voice responded. Deep, official, clipped. Whitmore's expression shifted from irritation to hesitation. "Yes, Captain Marcus Hayes. Yes, Pentagon issued escort orders." Her voice faltered as the confirmation came through. "I see. Understood." When she hung up, the silence was suffocating. The operations manager cleared his throat. "Well?" Whitmore swallowed hard. "They confirmed it." Her voice was low now, almost reluctant. The crowd exhaled collectively. A veteran in a wheelchair saluted Marcus from across the room. Several passengers bowed their heads briefly in respect. The orders read aloud. Marcus picked up the envelope and opened it slowly, pulling out the crisp pages inside. With a voice that carried across the terminal, he read aloud. "By order of the United States Army, Captain Marcus A. Hayes is hereby designated the official escort for the remains of Private First Class Jonathan Miller, deceased, to be transported from Dover Air Force Base to Springfield, Missouri, with full honors. The escort is to remain with the remains at all times, from point of origin to final interment." The words hung in the air, heavy and solemn. A child asked in a whisper, "Mommy, what does that mean?" The mother replied softly, "It means he's bringing a soldier home." Reflection in the silence. Marcus folded the orders back carefully and placed them in the envelope. He didn't gloat, didn't smirk, didn't rub it in. His face was the same calm mask it had been since he arrived, but inside, emotions collided. Pride in his mission, sadness for Private Miller and his family, a quiet weariness from having to prove himself yet again. Still, he knew this moment wasn't about him. It was about the fallen, about the dignity owed to every soldier who gave everything. Flashback. Training in the sand. The silence of the terminal carried him back to another silence, the suffocating quiet of the desert during his first deployment. He remembered crouching in sand, sweat pouring down his back, waiting for a convoy. His sergeant had leaned over and said, "Hayes, one day you'll be the one keeping everyone calm when the world's falling apart. You got that steel in you. Don't let anyone shake it." That steel had been tested many times, by gunfire, by loss, by prejudice, and now by the dismissive doubt of an airline supervisor. He had learned then what he reminded himself now. Calm wasn't weakness. Calm was control. The terminal's transformation, the operations manager finally spoke. "Captain Hayes, on behalf of the airline, I apologize for the delay. You, of course, will accompany the remains. We'll make every accommodation necessary." The words were like a stone dropping into water. Suddenly, the atmosphere shifted. Passengers who had been muttering in frustration were now nodding in respect. Some clapped softly. Others simply stood straighter, their eyes fixed on Marcus. Whitmore stepped back, her face flushed, her authority stripped away not by aggression, but by truth. Marcus inclined his head slightly. "Thank you. Now, if you'll excuse me, I need to confirm the handling of the casket." He walked past the counter, the sea of eyes following him, not with suspicion but with reverence. The silence was not empty. It was full of respect, of recognition, of something greater than any one person in that room. Boarding with purpose. When the time came to board, Marcus was first to walk down the jet bridge, flanked by 2 ground crew members who now treated him with solemn deference. Through the window, passengers caught sight of the casket draped in the American flag being loaded carefully into the hold. A hush fell over the boarding line. Hats were removed. A few people placed hands over their hearts. Marcus walked steadily, his boots striking the floor with a measured rhythm. Each step was both a duty and a promise, to stand guard, to bear witness, to honor. Reflection in the seat seated in the cabin, Marcus gazed out the window. The plane was still parked, but in his mind he was already on a journey, not just from Atlanta to Missouri, but through memories, through the corridors of service and sacrifice. He thought of Private Miller, whom he had never met in life, yet whose story he now carried. He thought of the family waiting, the empty chair at their table, the hole that could never be filled, and he thought of the lesson he hoped the terminal had absorbed. Never judge the worth of a man by assumptions. Sometimes the quiet figure in uniform carried the heaviest burdens of all. The descent. The plane shuddered gently as it began its descent into Missouri. Captain Marcus Hayes sat upright, hands folded neatly on his lap, eyes fixed on the horizon beyond the window. Below, patches of farmland stretched like a quilt stitched, with rivers and roads. To most passengers, it was just another landing. For Marcus, it was the approach to the final chapter of his mission. Beneath his feet, in the cargo hold, rested the casket of Private First Class Jonathan Miller, flag-draped, heavy not with wood and steel alone, but with 21 years of laughter, dreams, and unfinished life. Marcus inhaled slowly, letting the truth settle. In a few minutes, he would walk off this plane not as a traveler, but as a guardian delivering someone's son, someone's brother, someone's pride. The flight's transformation. The flight itself had been strangely quiet. The captain of the aircraft had announced early on that there was a military escort and a fallen service member on board. And that announcement had changed the cabin's entire mood. The usual hum of conversation was replaced by hushed tones, respectful nods, and moments of silence. A flight attendant had quietly approached Marcus mid-flight. "Sir," she said, her voice trembling just slightly. "On behalf of the crew, thank you. If you need anything at all, just ask." Marcus had nodded politely. His words, simple but sincere, "Thank you for your respect." He didn't need special treatment. What he needed, what the fallen deserved, was dignity. Flashback. The weight of escort duty. As the plane began its final approach, Marcus's mind returned to his very first escort mission years ago. He remembered walking beside a casket on a similar journey, his throat tight, his heart pounding. His commanding officer had said to him, "Hayes, this is one of the most sacred duties you'll ever perform. Families may forget medals and speeches, but they'll never forget the dignity of how their loved one was brought home." That lesson had seared itself into Marcus's bones. Every step he took, every order he followed, was about ensuring that the fallen soldier's final journey was marked by honor, not haste. Arrival. The wheels of the plane screeched softly against the runway, jolting Marcus from his thoughts. Passengers stirred, but no one unbuckled their seatbelt yet. Perhaps they sensed that this wasn't a typical landing. The captain's voice came over the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, we ask for your patience as we deplane today. We are honored to have on board Captain Marcus Hayes, escorting the remains of Private First Class Jonathan Miller. We ask that you remain seated while Captain Hayes exits first to fulfill his solemn duty." Silence. Pure, reverent silence. Marcus stood slowly, adjusting his uniform, tugging at his jacket until every line was perfect. He picked up his cap, smoothed its brim, and placed it firmly on his head. Then, with calm precision, he walked down the aisle. Passengers watched him as though he carried more than just his own weight, as though the dignity of a nation rested on his shoulders. A few had tears in their eyes. Others saluted quietly from their seats. The tarmac. When Marcus stepped out onto the jet bridge and then onto the tarmac, the sight awaiting him was overwhelming. A military honor guard stood in formation near the cargo bay. Beyond them, a crowd of civilians, hundreds of people from the town, had gathered. Flags waved in the late afternoon sun. Mothers clutched children. Veterans in faded uniforms stood at attention, their salutes crisp despite age. The front, a family huddled together. Private Miller's parents, his younger sister, and his grandmother. Their grief was palpable, but so was their pride. Marcus felt the air shift, heavy with emotion. He straightened his spine, every movement deliberate. This was not the time for him to be Marcus the man. This was the time to be Captain Hayes, the embodiment of duty and respect. The transfer. The casket was carefully lowered from the cargo hold, its flag vibrant in the sun. The honor guard moved in flawless synchronization, their white gloves gripping firmly as they carried it down. Marcus fell into step beside them, his stride matching theirs. Each footstep was a drumbeat of honor, a declaration that this journey was sacred. The crowd was utterly silent. Only the measured steps of the escort and the faint rustle of the flag could be heard. As they reached the waiting hearse, Marcus saluted sharply, his hand steady, his eyes fixed on the stars of the flag. He held the salute until the casket was fully secured inside. Then, and only then, did he lower his hand, meeting the family. The Miller family stepped forward, their faces streaked with tears. Jonathan's mother reached out, her hand trembling as it grasped Marcus's. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice breaking. "Thank you for bringing my boy home." Marcus's throat tightened, but his reply was steady. "It was my honor, ma'am. He served with courage, and he comes home with honor." The father, a tall man with calloused hands, shook Marcus's firmly. "You stood up for him even before we knew you," he said, his voice low. "We heard what happened at the airport. People told us. You didn't let anyone treat this mission lightly. That means more than you know." Marcus blinked back, the burn in his eyes. He had faced combat zones with unwavering steadiness. But this family's gratitude pierced deeper than any bullet ever could. Legacy in the crowd, the story of the confrontation at the airport had spread quickly, carried by passengers who had witnessed it. Some had posted online, others had called friends and family. By the time Marcus and the honor guard stepped onto Missouri soil, people already knew. Signs in the crowd read, "Welcome home, hero. Respect our soldiers. Honor the fallen," and, more quietly among whispers, "That captain stood tall. He reminded everyone what respect looks like." Marcus realized then that his mission had carried two burdens, one physical, one symbolic. He had escorted a fallen soldier home, but he had also carried a lesson for the living, that dignity must never be compromised, no matter the setting, no matter the skepticism. Flashback. His father's words as the hearse doors closed. Marcus remembered his father's voice from years ago, on the night before Marcus shipped out for basic training. "Son," his father had said, "people will doubt you, they'll test you. They'll look at you and decide what you can or cannot be. But you don't answer with anger. You answer with excellence. Excellence speaks for itself." Today, standing before a grieving family and a watching crowd, Marcus felt those words surge through him. Excellence had spoken. Dignity had spoken. And the silence that had fallen in the airport terminal was proof of that.